Well, hi everyone. The name's Nat as always, and I work at Exceptional Individuals, a social enterprise for neurodivergent individuals. And each week we take a deep dive into a fascinating subject. And today we're looking at not only ADHD, not only medication, but ADHD and medication and the future of it. Why? Because ADHD medication is a controversial thing. Also, it's not even that effective for everyone. For some people it works, for some people it doesn't work. Now, wouldn't it be great if we knew more about it, there were more options, and it was more effective? So today we're going to be looking at the future. Now, some of this might be looking at new types of medication, other times it might just be looking at new naming conventions, or just making what we currently have more effective, cheaper, less of it. So there are many different avenues we're going to be going down in order to find out what's next for helping us navigate this, this scary old neurotypical world. For those of you who do not know, I'm neurodivergent myself. I support neurodivergent people, and I am currently doing my master's in neuroscience. So this is where this lovely research has kind of started from, but also I've been doing a lot of my own research. Now today, while medication, honestly, this could be on a number of subjects, maybe depression, schizophrenia, ADHD, any sort of condition that medication, but we are going to be doing a hyper-focused on ADHD. So today, we're looking at you. For the other neurodivergents, typically they don't have medication. While they might have medication which supports some of the characteristics or symptoms, it won't be tackling the diagnosis as such, where ADHD is a little bit different. Now here, maybe at some point, will be a picture of us. Yes, our nice team. Today you've got myself in the chat, and you also have April. So thanks everyone. Oh, Clara says, I'm thinking about specialising in ADHD assessment / consultancy, so gathering information and checking if the ideas stick for long enough. Brilliant. Well, fingers crossed. If you do get into it, I'll be very supportive. Now, the last webinar we did was on depression. Sounds depressing, but actually it was quite an interesting session. And we studied depression because, unfortunately, a lot of us ND folk also have co-occurring depression. So we kind of looked at, why is that? Is it genetic? Is it environmental? Is it a little bit of both? So do go on our YouTube and check that out. So the future of ADHD medication. Now, before we get too excited, I'm not talking about the distant future. We're talking about the near future. So we're, no kind of flying cars just yet. But before we understand it, we kind of know what's currently on offer at the moment, why what we currently have might not be an ideal solution. ADHD is a really expensive condition to have, particularly if you're going private. And as such, that's one of the issues. The other one is its effectiveness. I've said it before and I'll say it again. When we treat a lot of conditions, what we normally do is throw a gigantic net at it and see what works. When ideally we should have like one of those kind of whale spear guns and shoot directly at it. So we're getting there, but we're not quite there yet. So if any of you are starting that journey of medication, do know that just because something doesn't work doesn't mean that it won't work in the future, doesn't mean there aren't other opportunities. So the two major areas which we'll be looking at is, first of all, the bare necessities of ADHD medication, looking at its effects, its focus, its impulsivity, and how the medication might be able to keep some of those qualities at bay, particularly if they interfere with day-to-day activities. So the thing with therapy, right, is it is a treatment, and that is often something which is overlooked. Often we get asked which one's better. Truthfully, I think a blended approach works really well. But for not medication isn't for everyone. Oh, disclosure before I go any further, not a doctor. So please go see your GP before you make any life-altering decisions. And if anything goes wrong, not my fault. So today is just about informing you to make your own choices or to speak to a professional should you have further investigation. Now, in terms of future medications, we're going to be looking at more personalised options, and this is where I think the future really lies. At the moment, it's, okay, welcome, sit down, try these meds first. If they don't work, come back and we'll try something new. But in the future, we'll do some like magical tests and we'll know exactly what's going to work and how it's going to work and what dosage. So it's going to be far more pinpointed. Also going to be looking at research on non-stimulant drugs because the vast majority of drugs used for ADHD is stimulant. So why might other options not be currently as investigated yet, and what might the future hold? So question to kickstart today off, what does the future of ADHD meds look like? I've mentioned some of the areas, but where do you think this might possibly be able to rise? Now on this, feel free to be as out there as you possibly could. Maybe this could be wishful thinking or kind of what you know is currently in the pipeline. Because we've got tailored drugs to work with emotions, not just executive functioning. Yes, quite often we have to have a pill for that, a pill for that, a pill for that. If we could have something which is a one size fits all, or a silver bullet, which gets right to the point. Anyone else, what would you like to see from ADHD medication in the future? It could be that you don't want to see medication at all. Or it might be that you, I don't know, like, maybe you want it in a different type of form. Try to think about what you want, and then we can look about what is possible and what is currently in development. A pill that makes it all go away. Well, a lot of us, I would say actually there's a lot of positive qualities that come with having ADHD. So I would say most people, well, I wouldn't say most, a decent percentage doesn't want it to all go away. But what they do want to go away is the negative characteristics or the lack of control that they have. Being able to harness something like ADHD, I'd say would be amazing. Okay, we got more devotion making on the side of a patient rather than being told what's best. Yes, so patient first. I like that. I appreciate this is a hard question to answer, but maybe by the end of this you'll have a few more ideas. Being able to access medication quickly. Yep, straight away. Often the waiting list is huge, and then you have to wait to see if it works, and then, you know, if the first few things aren't working, it can get a little bit depressing. You're like, well, what's going to happen? But sometimes maybe it's a non-stimulant that you need, but you typically will have a stimulant first before you realise what works for you. So is it genetic? Well, a lot of you are saying yes. Now, truthfully, could it also be environmental? Yes, but it is absolutely genetic. And what do we mean by genetic? It's encoded into our DNA. It's part of who we are. This is why you can't really separate it. While there is something called CRISPR where you can edit DNA, we're not quite there yet, and it's still really futuristic, even though we're starting to progress in that area. And we are doing a session about that on autism around Christmas time. But in terms of where we are now, we are going to be looking at the makeup of our genome. So the importance of genes and environment. And this is the kind of conundrum. Are we treating the genetics or are we treating the environment? One of them puts the emphasis on us, the other one probably on our world leaders. So we've got some genes matter, and that is what we're saying. When we're looking at our DNA, some genes matter, some genes do not. Then we got some gene combos matter. So you got like some genes that connect to others. Those are the key areas we're looking at. And then we've got some genes matter in some environments. And this is a really interesting one. So what do we mean by that? Well, maybe you could be in some certain environments, your genes, while you might be more pre-positioned to, for instance, have ADHD or have some of the challenges associated it, your environment kind of mitigates it. Think of your genes like a little off-on switch. Sometimes they're switched on, sometimes they're switched off. And the environment, whether it's stressful, relaxing, hot, cold, a number of different factors, can determine whether or not something is kind of activated or triggered. So if we are creating medication, it can't just be to a particular gene. Sometimes it needs to be able to connect to a combination of them, and other times we need to do that in partnership with environmental factors. Now this might be just moving out, this might be getting world leaders to sort out pollution or kind of global warming. All of these things honestly play a part. So certain genes linked to ADHD may be more influential when exposed to specific environments such as like tobacco smoke. And this is an interesting thing. For all of you smokers out there, it probably isn't doing your ADHD any favours. And understanding why that is might help you or give you that incentive to quit if that is something you'd be wanting to do. Clara says, but also in some environments, ADHD, especially hyperactivity and hyperfocus, is an advantage. Yeah, no, I agree with you. There are advantages. So environmental factors can have a plus or a negative or a neutral, depending on the situation. All right, so next, complex pathways conditions. What house is best? So for me to explain what I mean by complex pathway conditions, I'm going to use a bit of an analogy to make it easier. So you see these different houses. What one do you think is best? Would you rather live in a little straw hut? Would you rather live in an igloo or live in a mansion? Now, there's always one person who wants to live in a hut. But I'd imagine most people would say mansion, right? It seems like the obvious idea. If you want to live somewhere, I'll live in a mansion. And that's the same. If you have ADHD, you'll take a stimulant. Now, on the surface, makes sense, but we're not looking at the nuances. We're not looking at the multifaceted, like kind of different avenues or regions or kind of tangents that the world lives in. Our world is complicated and you have to take multiple scenarios into consideration. So what do I mean by that? Well, what house is now best in a hot climate? Would you rather live in a hut, an igloo, or a mansion? Okay, so yeah, a hut, mansion. Some people still would. Okay, just to make this easy, I'm going to say the mansion doesn't have aircon. Yeah, there we are. Down we go. So hopefully you see what I'm getting at. While something might seem like the best approach, when you add additional factors in, okay, so in a hot climate, hut. Cold climate, maybe igloo. Maybe in like, I don't know, the US, or maybe in the UK, a mansion probably would be lovely. What about a place that has a lot of earthquakes? Or what about a place where there's high amounts of poverty? You know, so when you add additional layers in, the answer to the initial question does change. And the exact same thing is true with ADHD medication. Do we currently take all the different factors in terms of how old someone is, their gender, where they live, their access to resources, what attributes they find distressing and which ones they find advantageous? These are all the different areas where hopefully future medication will be able to say, I know exactly what I'm doing and I know exactly the impact and side effects that will come as a result of it. Or April says, if I was to live in a mansion that doesn't have AC in a hot climate, I could always use a fan. There's always someone. You could use a fan, but for this argument, the hut's the best one. But as you can see, everyone's different, okay? And this is the kind of the analogy I'm going at. E.g., the issue with stimulants and creativity. Yes, exactly. Some people argue that ADHD medication has this kind of zombie effect on them where it just kind of wipes them out. Not on everyone, but for some people. And if you are someone who is very creative, or that you rely on that creativity, that wouldn't be an ideal solution for you. So let's say you're someone who really doesn't like gigantic houses, then a mansion probably isn't going to be the best bet for you, or you're scared of ghosts. But if you're someone who likes chilling by the beach, maybe a hut's going to be the best one for you. Or if you're, for whatever reason, in Antarctica, an igloo's going to do the job nicely. So what makes diagnosing and treating neurodiversity hard? Now, obviously, we don't treat neurodiversity, we support the challenges, but with ADHD, I think you probably could use treating because some of the areas can be quite detrimental to day-to-day activity. So use that word with a grain of salt. But what do you think makes it difficult when it comes to supporting with those more challenging characteristics, such as lack of attention or focus? First of all, everyone is different. Absolutely. How you got 10 minutes when you're in the GP, how are you meant to tell them the complete history of who you are, to know your genetics, your environmental factors, to give a complete 360. It's impossible. And as such, the medication you get prescribed isn't going to be tailored. It's going to be an approximation. They're going to say, okay, what has worked for the vast majority of people? Well, there's a likelihood that this may also work for you. But there's also not a guarantee. Medication reacts different to different people. Yes, some people, it will get absorbed into their system faster. Other people, it will stay in their system for longer. Some people aren't able to kind of retain nutrients or different kind of chemicals. So you've got things called like half-life, how long it stays in the system, different ages, so many different factors. Individuals' needs vary across the whole of society, absolutely. So, for instance, some people, due to their kind of patterns in life, may not be able to take it at a certain time every day. And yet the medication will say that's the only way it works. Maybe you've got certain religious requirements, maybe certain dietary requirements. I only found out recently that Haribo has like pig bone in it or something, and I'm a vegetarian. I felt really guilty. I'm like, I'm eating these little Haribo and I probably shouldn't be. So it's these things. You've got to make sure that are there accessible versions for as many people as possible. Okay, we have different brains and bodies, different lifestyles and diet. While ADHD itself can't be treated, medication can be used to manage its symptoms, absolutely. Those characteristics are bad from the point of society, not necessarily the individual. Oh, I like that as well. Are we treating things because society says they should be treated, or are we treating them because we want them to be treated? And what other ones we got? We got thoughts and processes in mind. The body and its wiring isn't really understood overall. True, we know basically nothing about the brain in comparison to what there probably is still to learn. Okay, really great answers, everyone. Now, here's a nice quote from H.L. Menckhen. I probably pronounced his name wrong. He's a famous writer, and he says, for every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. And I think this is quite a good quote, because often humans like to find the most simple solutions imaginable. And I promise you there is always a simple solution to everything. Unfortunately, it's most likely wrong. And we kind of briefly touched upon this when we talked about neuroscience and education, how you get these really complex ideas for everyone to understand and we have to simplify them. But by simplifying them, kind of like what we're doing today, it's actually not that accurate. So it's that kind of chicken and the egg scenario. The answer we're looking for is probably more complex than the answer we actually want. Now, quiz time! Okay, in it to win it. You know, there is no prize at the end, but try anyway. How many ADHD subtypes? So how many subtypes of ADHD? So different kind of varieties. Are we looking at no subtypes, 3 subtypes, or we don't know? Okay, let's see what you'll put. Yes, everyone's right. So officially, there are 3 subtypes. You know, attentive, inattentive, you know, hyperactive, you got those ones, and you got kind of a combination. So you got some people who struggle with attention, other people who struggle with concentration, and then you got the other type. So at the moment, when we're kind of slicing and dicing ADHD up, we do it into 3 categories. However, truthfully, we don't know. There very, very well could be many, many types of ADHD. Originally with autism, there used to be, you know, Asperger's, high functioning, then there was like classic autism, Rett syndrome. There was all different types, but there was only so many of them. And what they did is they thought, actually, get rid of those categories, and now let's just call it ASD, Autism Spectrum Disorder, because that recognizes that there are so many different types of autism. Every single person is unique and different, and as such, we can't really group them together. Now that hasn't happened for ADHD. ADHD isn't a spectrum because there are 3 types that you can basically choose from. But what if ADHD was a spectrum? So it was, I know, ADDS, something like that. It would completely kind of transform the way we look at ADHD, and we wouldn't be treating it as much as a cookie cutter approach, but more person by person. So this is an important thing to know. Officially, we have said 3. but honestly, it could be way, way more than we currently know. Next question. How key are receptor subtypes in ADHD? So for those of you who aren't aware, receptors are like the big old baseball gloves on our neurons. These are the things that kind of catch the chemicals which make our body do the processing. And there are all different types of receptors. We've got some with really big arms, little arms, massive mitts, lots of fingers. It varies. Okay, now we've got not important, very important, we don't know. Unfortunately, we don't know. And this is another big area because when we put medication in our body, it essentially dissolves and it releases chemicals. And receptors in our body are the things that catches those chemicals from the pills. Now, depending on what receptor you're targeting, you might want to have a different way of kind of creating the medication. For instance, some receptors are going to be like, nope, I don't accept this medication. Other receptors are going to be like, yep, I'll take that. But they'll also take other medication. So at the moment, we've thrown a big blanket approach and we're seeing what receptors catch. But what if we targeted particular receptors and we know exactly which one is taking it? Because a lot of the time, the reason why we get side effects is receptors will unintentionally accept additional chemicals that we're not really wanting it to, but we can't really help it. But if we can kind of really target it, maybe that could help. Okay, next question. What happens when a neurotransmitter signals? So this is when one brain cell kind of signals to the next brain cell. We've talked about it in previous webinars, but if you're new, have a good guess. This image is completely covering it up, so good luck to you. And what we mean is there is a neuron, a brain cell, and the connection between the next one. So we've got it stops the cell's activity, not at all. It triggers a cell signal, exciting or inhibiting it. So that's absolutely true. You've got one brain cell. To really simplify it, we send the electricity, sends it down, and then we've got the next part where it kind of jumps over a little chemical gap, and then a signal takes it again. And during this phase, so many things can go right and can go wrong. So sometimes medication can make that signal go faster. Other times it can make it suck up the kind of recycle the old chemicals better. Other times it can make the receptors more receptive or less receptive. So different medication can have different effects on the neurotransmission part of it. So when we're looking at like why is it so difficult to make new medication, there are so many different things. And if we truly do want individualized, personalized medication which is tailor-made for you, we have to know all the environmental factors plus all the genetic factors in terms of how your transmitters and your receptors work inside your body. You can see this being a little bit of like a daunting task. Oh, Anna says, we need then ways of checking how different receptors function in each individual, as sometimes some of them don't work very well. Yeah, it's true. And we are talking really, 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 really tiny. So how do we know what works in someone and doesn't work in another person? This is why for some people you need higher doses and other people lower ones. And some people different medication altogether. I know, Haley. Don't worry, it's not our job to fix it. It's people hopefully much, much smarter than myself to go off and fix it. But it's not a small undertaking by any means, hence why we're on a journey. Let's see how all of you done. Oh, okay. Very close, very close. Oh, Saint Elmo, well done. Emma, a very, very close second. Daphne, not bad. Well done, everyone. And don't worry, Pingu. Some say you didn't even try. Okay. Personally, I started to believe that we should first check typical side effects and decide which ones are most beneficial for us. Yeah, with side effects, every medication has side effects. It's all about which ones can you live with, which ones, is the juice worth the squeeze. Sometimes it may not be worth it, other times it might be. Oh, April. Well done, April. Just wanted that credit. Good on you. And just so everyone knows, while April does help me out on the webinars, she doesn't help with the creation of them, so she's completely neutral. She did win fair and square. So now let's look at some uncertain abilities. What are things that we can't control and what are things that we can control? Now knowing what you do know, we know that making new medication that is tailor-made is bloody difficult. Is it possible or is it impossible to do the following? Can we make better medication? Is it even possible? Have we got the best stuff available that we can possibly make at the moment? I would argue it's very possible to make better medication. We are just on a journey. Can we go past subreceptors? So can we really tailor things? Yeah, we can do, just requires a lot more research. Can we predict who will respond to treatment? Well, again, yes, we can, but it requires a lot of money, a lot of research, and also, are we currently there yet? No. So the thing between possible and impossible, anything's impossible, but is it likely? Maybe that was a better question. How likely is this possibility, rather than whether or not it's possible or not possible? And can we treat issues before they start? Now, this is where it gets really controversial. For instance, you might be able to know if your child's going to have ADHD at birth or before they're born, and then you can come up with a treatment plan, if you want a treatment plan at all. So while these things, in theory, are possible, because if it's in genetic, you can test for it, at the moment, our DNA is so complicated. Like, it took us so long to kind of understand the entire human genome. Soon, we're going to be able to do it for like every single individual. But before this is something we can do which is actually useful, we actually have to understand what ADHD really is, and we're still at the very early stages of that. Okay, is it ethical to treat the issue of ADHD? Oh, that's a good question. You tell me. When it comes to neurodivergence, the neurodiversity movement would argue, no, it's not ethical. We are who we are. It shouldn't be treated. Whereas some people will be like, absolutely, it puts me at a disadvantage in society, and society isn't changing anytime soon. That's a question which, unfortunately, I can't answer, but it's definitely one that's worth asking. Now, will there be a perfect cure for some ND conditions? So, yes or no? Will there be a perfect cure for some ND conditions? Again, a controversial question. Yes or no? Now, while there isn't an answer to this, likelihood is no. Will there ever be a silver bullet for some of these conditions? First of all, should there be? Very well, you could rightly argue no. For those of you who think it's a choice, well, if there is a cure, or if there isn't a cure, and then you've got people who feel like, absolutely, I don't want this. And considering how complex human beings are, perfect is a very, very big word, but there's definitely improvements we can make. So please do not feel that I'm advocating for a cure for ND conditions. That's not my personal views, but these are questions which people have every single day. So we should definitely ask them and ask, should we, could we, and how might we? So what do you think is key if we want to create this beautiful silver bullet, this absolutely perfect way to support someone who struggles thinking the way they do? What do you think we need to do? Now, all of these ideally would be beneficial, but we only have so much money, so we need to pick where exactly we're going to be putting our funding. Are we doing it to optimize current medication? Forget making new medication. We need to work on what's already available and really optimize it and make it sing. Having a global strategy. At the moment, every kind of country, region, community has their own approaches. Should this be like something that we get the UN involved in, where we have like a real big global approach? Because ADHD does affect people globally. What about developing new compounds? So this is kind of creating new drugs, new medications, rather than just reinvesting in what we already have. Now, the reason why this is quite challenging is drug companies, they're for profit, they love that money. And if they've got current medication, which is good enough, doing the job, they have no incentive to do more research unless they see the need for it. And then we've got personalized medicine. This is creating things that are tailor-made just for you and aren't a blanket approach. Boo! Personalized medicine. Yes, I think that's a very good choice. If we could create something, it would be tailor-made for you. And that might sound really difficult, but it's completely possible. We've got scans and systems, we've got FRMI machines, we've got EEGs, we've got future kind of technologies which you haven't created yet, which could completely map you and tell you what works, what doesn't work. We've already got technology now which you can do a DNA test and it can tell you how likely you are to develop something, how likely you are to respond to something. At the moment, it's not really that exact, it's more or less, but the more data we get worldwide, the more exact we are going to be able to do it. I've done these like DNA tests and I was like, oh, you aren't very likely to be good at sports. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm really terrible at sports. But then there's other things which it gets completely wrong. So it's kind of like a pseudoscience at the moment. While there is official research behind it, it's probably not detailed enough in order to make accurate. You definitely wouldn't want to go to your GP and they just say, you know what, I have no idea. However, your horoscope today says, that would be awful. Well, maybe some of you would like that. So let's have a look at some studies. What is being done in the secret of darkness? Well, in some studios and studies and labs, there's studies on how to make ways to stick with ADHD medication. One of the biggest challenges actually is a lot of people with ADHD medication do not stick with it. And this is nothing to do with creating new medication or improving old medication. It's just about getting people to use what they currently have in a better way. So the method was to test comparing regular treatments to a plan that helps people stick with it. So nice and simple, it was just about creating a plan that helps get people to actually follow their treatment plan. So in it, they tackled treatment worries, provide clear info, and made custom plans. So essentially, rather than just giving you a medication and say, thank you, come again, they walked you through it, they explained it, they gave context, so you were very much a co-pilot rather than just a passenger. The findings was intervention groups followed meds better. Who would have thought, eh? Giving people a bit more information of their own treatment plan had better results. Though it may seem basic that this data is needed in order to kind of push change along. What about another study? So another study by Green and colleagues was about reducing the side effects of antipsychotic meds. And I know what you're saying. Antipsychotic, not ADHD. No. But some of this research, some of the findings are interesting and maybe they could be applied to ADHD in a future study. So there was this program called The Stride, which studied how this diet affected people on antipsychotics. Patients got help for weight loss and better diets. The active group had better health indicators. Active steps cut side effects, improving results. So what this is saying is side effects suck. But if we could also change our diet and our exercise, then the side effects decreased. So with ADHD, some of the side effects are one of the main reasons that a lot of people decide to come off their medication and no longer continue it or even start it. But if you were to say, well, side effects will still be there, but if you follow this additional advice, you'll barely notice it and more people will take it. So we're looking at not only future medication, not improving current medication, but just actually getting people to continue their plan, which actually isn't happening at the moment. People take it, they're feeling better, they stop taking it, they plummet. Now for another super quiz. I know, 2 quizzes in one day. What am I like? Limits of current ADHD trials. So trials is when they do kind of some research. Is it there's too many participants? Is it low study numbers, so not enough participants? Is it broad inclusion and exclusion criteria, or the randomized control trials? What is currently stopping us from progressing our knowledge? If you have no idea, just pick something. Oh, so while you could argue some of these are right, the main answer, at least from the studies I looked at, was broad inclusion and exclusion criteria. Now that one may need a little bit of explanation if you're like, So high participant number. No, more the merrier in some regards, as long as they're accurate. Low study numbers. Well, while you might think that's the case, sometimes lower numbers, but a better criteria is better. For instance, if you were testing ADHD and you had like 100 people with no ADHD and 3 with ADHD, it doesn't going to work. And then randomized control trials. So broad inclusion and exclusion, meaning essentially when you're doing these trials, you're just saying everyone, let's get the whole population, anyone who will do it. And as such, the quality of the data isn't that accurate. Typically, it's always students that are doing these tests. And they just want some quick money. So yeah, I've got ADHD. And exclusion criteria, maybe there's certain factors which will limit people out. For instance, I love doing a trial. I find them fun. However, because I have, say, dyslexia and ADHD and autism or on some medication, I'm always ruled out from participating because they want someone who is as pure or as, simple as possible in order to do the trials. And as a result, they are missing out on real human beings. Because when we're taking medication, you are never going to be the ideal candidate. The ideal candidate doesn't exist. It is kind of the mean value of everyone. All right, what we've got? Not enough studies. What can I do about that? Okay, how can we find out what ADHD studies are currently happening in the UK? So, Anna, what I'd recommend, go to PubNet or Google Scholar, and you can, in the search criteria, type ADHD, and then you can kind of search on terms of the dates which are available, and you can get an idea of the ones that have been peer-reviewed and approved. And you can also search region as well. So PubNet or Google Scholar is a really good place to start. That's where I get all my research from as well. But when you're doing the research, you do have to kind of check out how many people are doing it, how reputable, how trustworthy is the paper. There's a few little different factors. Actually, coming next year, I am planning on doing some things on how to conduct your own neurodiversity research. So that could be quite interesting. I know, I'm just planning it at the moment, but fingers crossed it could be good. Oh, okay, Pub, like publish. And Google Scholar, yeah, those are quite good ones. There are others, but unfortunately, a lot of them, they hide their things behind paywalls. So unless you're kind of attached to some sort of educational establishment or academia, they don't allow you to see it all. So keep that in mind. All right, next one. Future ADHD research limitations. So what is another limitation in terms of why this research isn't moving along faster? Is it doing smaller tests? So is one of the things we're not doing smaller tests? Paying participants more? Is that... Sorry, this is worded poorly, but all these answers are ones which we should be doing. So let's go through it. So, future ADHD research limitations. Doing smaller tests. Are our tests too broad or are they too small? Yeah, either way. Paying participants more. While honestly, that would help getting better quality people, a lot of people are happy to do it for free. Now, not including real world patients. So what do I mean by that? Well, like I said, if you're taking someone who has just ADHD and lives in the most perfect environment possible, while your research isn't going to have too many external factors, it's not really going to represent the real person. But the answer we picked for this, or at least Gold did, is using big real-world data. And what do we mean by that? So if we take a small sample size, it tells us only about that region. But if we use worldwide data, you get a much more three-dimensional view. Now, while that would be amazing, you then have to sort out all the things that are kind of red herrings. It gets kind of confusing. All right, number 6. Drawbacks with national databases in ADHD research. So we've just said it. These databases, this big data is definitely what we need. But what are the issues with it? Is it that some of the groups, the way they kind of criteria people is artificially created? Is it that more people are interested in joining, so we get too many? Is it too expensive? Or is it faster recruitment process? So faster recruitment process, that's a good thing. More expensive research, while that is a drawback, it's not really that much more expensive. More people interested in joining, actually I'm not too sure about that. But the main reason is artificially created groups. So what does that even mean? What do we mean by artificially created groups? Essentially, if we got all this data, we try and group people kind of artificially, and it doesn't always work that way. So you might say, the way that human beings, we have carved up the planet, but that is what we've done. That isn't like genetically. So maybe we kind of saying this group, that group, that group, and it doesn't actually reflect the true population. So we're interfering with the data and how useful it actually might be. Okay, number 7 of 8. Usefulness of electronic health records in ADHD research. So we're really looking at big data at the moment. Why do you think having electronic data is the way forward? And I know what you're thinking. Surely that's what we do already. A lot of research and data is currently manual. You'd be surprised at how much of it is not currently digitized. Oh, so eliminates all bias? No, there is still bias in electronic records. For instance, things are only as unbiased as the people who create them. If you use like ChatGPT, you'll notice that can be biased as well. Provide funding for trials? Nope, doesn't really do that. Replace randomized trials? Definitely doesn't replace those. But it tracks real-world patient progress, and that is what is really useful. People with ADHD kind of, we go up, we go down, left, right, all over the place. Old paper records, it'd be done one, and there wouldn't be a continuous pattern. Now we can track someone's progress, we can see how they're like evolving, what's working, what's not working, and it gives us, again, much more reliable data. All right, let's see the last one. By the way, I appreciate these questions are a little bit nuanced, so sorry if you get them wrong, but I actually think they're right. Benefits of utilising real-world samples and identifying subgroups. So what are some of the benefits of us getting a lot more detailed with our understanding of ADHD? With this detailed information from these kind of massive online kind of databases that we've talked about, we could create artificial groups, increase participant compensation, reduce research costs, and make research more reliable. Well, while the others are true, making it more reliable is definitely the biggest benefit. So the more data we have, the more reliable data we have, the more reliable the information will be. Yes, there will be some kind of red herrings or data that isn't quite accurate, but the bigger the numbers, it kind of filters that out and you end up getting a more realistic answer. It's why like Google and Facebook know so much about us, just because they have so much data that they can actually predict what we're thinking, feeling, what we like, what we don't like. Now, if we were to use all that information for good rather than evil, who knows what we might achieve? So we've got creating, yep. So really great. Anyway, now what you're all waiting for? Oh, smashed it. See, what happened there is, Emma, you're just really fast at answering, so you get a few like cheeky extra points. No, you did good. And Daphne, well done. Good on Kay. April, what happened? But well done, everyone. And somehow, Pingu got 0 points, but still got a decent little bar there. So what have we learned? Well, better ADHD research from different symptom groups. By having this wide amount of research and data, it can boost ADHD research, meaning studying symptom groups. So a study which is doing work in depression at the moment looked at a wide range of antidepressants, and they found that antidepressants work better than placebo pills. Sub-studies compare real-world treatment to placebo. Antidepressants always beat placebos regularly. Now, this information, which was taken from a massive data set used on for depression, if we were to use that same, not that exact same data set, but a similar sized one for ADHD, the understanding we get could improve the medication we already have available without even needing to create any additional things. So while we are talking about the future of ADHD, sometimes the future is already here. We've just got to get all that data together in order to actually make use of it. So the next steps, what are we going to do? Well, we need to have a bit of a plan going forward. Now, there are people actively working on it. We've got the Roma group. I'll explain who they are shortly. We've got Stephen's team, and he's working on some amazing research. And we've also got the possibility of completely renaming the entire system of medication, because one of the other biggest reasons why medication isn't effective is because of the stigma attached to it, so people aren't taking it. So what is Roma? Well, it's a European study, and it looks at different kind of roadmaps on what we might want to do to advance our pharmacological study in medication. The infrastructure, so creating better infrastructure, biomedicine, develop more into that. These are like the EU's kind of key priority areas. Psychological treatments, sorry that the writing got all mumbled up. Social economics, public health, and well-being. So these are the 6 key areas that the EU is looking at into hopefully pushing us a bit forward when it comes to medication usage. So this isn't just focused on ADHD, this is a little bit more wider. Now, Stevens, who's a really well-known researcher in this area, created this nice paper, which you might read if you want to, called The Landscape of Priority Problems in Psychiatry. And I want you, these are quite big statements, so I want you to say if you disagree or if you agree. Either or is fine. And while you're doing that, let me read them out. We've got connecting ADHD symptoms to brain function improves our understanding. Do you think that's true or false? Do you disagree or agree? So connecting ADHD symptoms to brain functions. So let's say if you're struggling with attention, you can actually find the part of the brain which is struggling. So that is another area which we haven't looked into, medication aside. Symptoms are crucial for understanding mental health like ADHD. So rather than just knowing the label, we're knowing the exact symptoms. Now, I appreciate they say mental health here, and ADHD isn't mental health, but these things are so interlinked, hence why that language was used. Linking symptoms and ADHD diagnosis deepens our understanding. And grouping patients by variations aid ADHD's understanding. So we talked a little bit about subtypes. Essentially, by having a wider range of subtypes, we can make the treatment more focused. I think most of these are quite reasonable, to be fair. And I think these are a really good framework in terms of what we should be looking at going forward. Now, here's a quick true or false. These drugs can be used for ADHD. True or false? Antidepressants, can we use antidepressants, antipsychotics, and mood stabilizers? What can be used for ADHD? And you might see where I'm going at with this when I talked about how we might completely scrap naming conventions. True, true, true. Yes, all of them can be used for ADHD. But I'm guessing, can you already see the problem here? Would you necessarily want to take antipsychotics if you don't have psychosis? You might think, oh, that sounds a bit stigmatizing. A mood stabilizer? I don't have a mood problem. And you can see how the stigma might stop people from taking medication. And the reason these drugs are called antidepressants, are called antipsychotics, are called mood stabilizers is purely for the fact that when they were first created, that was their initial purpose. And it was later, after we'd done more research, we realized they could also have further benefits in other conditions. So this kind of old name, which we originally attached to it, has rippled down history, and as a result, may be affecting people's uptake of trying it and seeing if it works for them. So why might someone with ADHD avoid antidepressants, psychotics, or mood stabilizers? I feel like I just answered it, but if any of you do have any additional answers, do let me know. The biggest one, let's face it, is stigma. There are many drugs which sound terrifying that people aren't taking, so when you go into the GP, they're literally picking from like, okay, do you want that or do you want that? Rather than picking from a whole wide variety of things that might be better for you, but they know that it might be confusing. If you went in for ADHD and then you're left with antipsychotics, you could be quite confused, but that's more because you might not understand why. or the GP didn't actually tell you why. Remember when we looked at that study and it was nice and simple? By talking people through the process, there was a better uptake. Yes, and this is proving it right here. Avoidance, confidence, miseducation, labels, other perceptions or problems, absolutely. So there's this new scheme coming up, and it's called NBN, Neuroscience-Based Nomenclature. And it's essentially a group of smart people got together and they thought, if we know that the names that were originally created are potentially stopping people from benefiting from what these drugs have to offer, what if we completely change the way we name drugs? And the question here is, who would it benefit? Would it doctors? Would it help patients choose better, reduce stigma, or help you plan ahead? Nice. And basically they all got it. Yeah, having a new naming convention could really help people. So on this, I want you to let me know if you prefer the current naming convention or a new naming convention. Now, just so we're all clear, these new names aren't the actual names. These are ones that were created to give you an idea. The actual namings are still being discussed. But the idea is, do you go for a generic name such as Adderall, which you always associate with ADHD, or do you name it something which is, as they would say, it says what it is on the tin, so neurofocus, brain focus. And let's say if you have dyslexia, but would also benefit from Adderall, if you had something called neurofocus, it's less stigmatized than having something which is known for ADHD. Or Ritalin, which goes hand in hand with ADHD, if it was just called Focus Boost, again, it's more simpler and it says what it is on the tin. Now, these are some of the benefits. Oh, mood bender. Mender. Yeah, I can see why that might not be as good. Now, these are just a suggestion on what could work. Now, unfortunately, there are pros and cons. I'm a big fan of this new naming convention, but you could see how it could get out of hand quick. The other thing is even future-proof. Like, are we creating a problem for future generations, or is this going to be the one naming convention to rule them all? So what are the pros, what are the cons? It notes that drugs affect multiple systems in a rank order. So having this new naming convention, it's not saying it's for XYZ, it's more talking about the symptoms and the characteristics that it's treating. So I'd say that's a pro. Clara, it doesn't really solve the off use of label. No, it doesn't. We've got new symptoms are harder to adopt, even if better. So while we could create a whole new system, people they stick to what they know. I'm sure the majority of you always still use like imperial measurements, even though we've been doing metric ones forever now. I still use like stone and feet, even though I got taught metric. People take ages to adopt new things. We've got covers. Approaches use effective side effects and brain links. So essentially, it's telling you way more information than just one name. And we've got complex names can make things harder to understand. So with some drugs, the names will get quite extra. And when you look at medication, you can barely pronounce the names because they're so confusing. This would be able to hopefully get rid of that. Okay, let's have a look. Anna says, I don't like the new system as it might create different effects for each person, so it might not be a mood mender for some. Yeah, so what you're saying is it's just creating additional, or it's creating new problems. It might be solving some, but are creating additional ones. Just so you all know, this is just a proposed idea. It isn't actually happening, but I think it's an interesting thought experiment. We also got mood stabilizers, stabilize mood. Your ADHD, I don't like to hear that my mood dynamic is inappropriate. Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I hadn't thought of that. So while these are some solutions and suggestions, there's a lot more research to happen. Here are some few additional researches, which I think are quite interesting. And while you notice that some of them are on depression, I do think because this research is still developing, looking at what has happened for previous conditions, which, let's face it, have more money or are more popular, we might see where we want to kind of move the direction. But to end on this, the future of ADHD medication isn't as simple as creating new medication. It's about creating new medication which is tailor-made for that person. It's about improving the effectiveness and the uptake of our current medication, and also looking at completely different approaches such as therapy or kind of talking or just other areas. So the future is an exciting one, but ideally it's going to be one that is tailor-made for every single person and not just a blanket approach. Labels are useful for a starting point, but they aren't the... Any last questions for today before we wrap up another lovely Thursday? Oh, thanks, Daphne. Very much appreciate it. I guess it's much more about losing labels of different conditions and looking into mechanics or symptoms instead. Yes, that is a very good way of wrapping it up. Labels are a starting point, but symptoms are far more important. And that is where that new naming convention was leading. Is it perfect? No, but that is definitely one of the biggest things. So before we start kind of whacking out all our microscopes and scientists, maybe just working on the stigma of what we currently have could have massive repercussions in terms of people getting the support that they need. Or check out Conveyor Belt Theory, explaining hereditary aspects of ADHD and how complicated it is. Oh, thanks, Anna. I really appreciate that. Now, our next webinar is on my birthday. Woo! I know, unintentional. I should have took the day off, but I planned it in advance, so we are doing it anyway. I know. I should have took a day off, but anyway, we're working on my birthday, so please turn up. And we're going to be looking at ADHD and substance abuse. This is a really interesting one. Just to make it really clear, having ADHD doesn't mean you're going to have substance abuse, but the likelihood of having it is substantially higher. Why? Because the relationship that ADHD has with addiction and what is going on a kind of micro neuro level is really similar to addiction. So we're going to be looking at why is there this connection? What is similar? What is dissimilar? And what can help? The reason I put Paris Hilton there is she has ADHD and has also gone to jail. That was the only link. Yeah, you got it. Okay, cool. So do check it out. Now, we also have all our recorded webinars. Check it out. Click the little subscribe button and you'll be able to sign up to our YouTube channel. Let's have a little look while we're here. See, we've got lots of YouTube videos and you can feel free to check them out. We've got so many now. We've got the depression one. We've got pharmacokinetics, dynamics, pharmacology, neuroscience and education, understanding the brain, neuromarketing. So many. So do check those out. I hope you enjoyed and found it interesting as always. Now go off, enjoy your life until next week where it's my birthday and you kind of have to turn up because this is as close as I have to friends. No, I do have friends, but I'm working and they can't come over. So do turn up and I'll see you all very, very soon. Bye everyone.